The wind howled over the abandoned industrial zone, where rusty pipes stretched like skeletons of forgotten giants, covered in a crust of ice. A white mongrel, her fur matted with snow and dirt, trudged through the drifts. Her paws sank into the white slush, leaving tracks that were immediately covered. She had been alone for weeks, banished from the gate by a pack that saw her swollen belly as nothing but a burden. Her eyes, usually lively, were now dull with exhaustion, but instinct drove her forward, to find a shelter where the frost couldn't reach those who were about to be born. She smelled it before she saw it. A narrow passage between two massive pipes, where the wind died down and the snow accumulated less. The pipes, cold from long extinguished heat, radiated only chill, but their curve created a kind of alcove, protected from the direct blast of the blizzard. The mongrel squeezed inside. Her sides scraped against the icy walls, sending shivers through her body. She circled, pawing away a thin layer of snow to lie on the bare ground, which hadn't completely frozen yet. The pain came suddenly like a blow, making her whimper quietly so as not to attract attention. In this world weakness called predators. The first pup appeared in the semi-darkness, a tiny ball of mucus and fur, blindly nudging in search of warmth. The mongrel instinctively licked it, cleaning it, pushing it closer to herself, where her body, despite the chill, radiated its last warmth. The wind outside intensified. Snowflakes pushed through the gaps, settling on her back, but she didn't move, pressing herself closer to the ground. The second one came next, then the third. Each time she repeated the ritual. Her tongue worked tirelessly, her breathing quickened, and her eyes watched the entrance to the shelter, where shadows might hide a threat. The fourth pup was weaker. Its squeak was barely audible, but the mother didn't give up, tucking it under her belly where milk was already beginning to flow. She felt the cold crawling up her paws, but she ignored it, focusing on the warmth inside, on these tiny creatures that huddled against her, instinctively seeking warmth. The fifth and sixth completed the litter, and now the alcove was filled with quiet whimpers, interrupted only by her heavy breathing. The mongrel lay down, wrapping them all in her body like a shield. Her white fur blended with the snow, making them almost invisible. Night fell completely. The moon broke through the clouds, reflecting in the icy facets of the pipes, but inside the shelter, darkness reigned, broken only by the warmth of a mother's heart. She didn't sleep. Her ears caught every rustle, every distant bark, every creak of metal in the wind. But for now everything was quiet. The pups, having had their first fill of milk, fell silent. Their tiny bodies rose in unison with her breath. The cold seeped into her bones. The pipes around her seemed like icy fingers squeezing the space, but she held on. Her eyes glistened with determination in the darkness. This was her refuge, fragile but her own. A place where life clung to the edge despite the frost that crept closer with every hour. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed, but the mongrel didn't stir, pressing the pups closer, as if whispering without words. "I'm here. And we'll endure." Morning brought a new snowfall. The wind subsided, leaving behind a silence broken only by the rare cawing of crows. The mongrel raised her head, sniffing the air. The scent of humans hung in the air, mixed with smoke and metal. She tensed, but the pups stirred, demanding warmth, and she lowered herself back down, frantically licking them to warm them up. The pipes around her were covered in fresh hoarfrost. Their surface gleamed like glass, reflecting her silhouette, a white ghost in an icy labyrinth. The pain of birth subsided, replaced by exhaustion, but the instinct of motherhood burned brighter, making her ignore the hunger that gnawed from within. The pups whimpered. One of them, the smallest, moved weakly, and she pushed it closer to her teat, feeling its tiny mouth latch onto life. The day dragged on, the sun flickered through the clouds, but it brought no warmth. It only illuminated the shelter, making it even more vulnerable. The mongrel heard footsteps in the distance, voices, but they passed by, not noticing. She relaxed, allowing herself to close her eyes for a moment, but sleep didn't come. Only memories of former freedom, when she ran through the streets, not knowing time. Now everything had changed. These 6 were her world, as fragile as the ice on the pipes. The wind started up again, blowing snow into the alcove, and she pressed herself closer. Her body was the only barrier against the cold. How much longer could she endure? The question hung in the air, but she didn't give up. Her breath warmed the air around her, creating a tiny oasis of heat in the heart of the cold. By evening, the frost had intensified, the pipes creaked under the pressure of the wind, and the mongrel felt the cold penetrating deeper, freezing the tips of her paws. The pups huddled against her. Their squeaks became quieter but more insistent. They sensed the threat. She licked each one in turn, and her tongue left traces of warmth. Her eyes scanned the entrance. The shadows lengthened. Night crept in again. Somewhere deep in her soul a spark glowed. Survive at any cost. But for now she lay motionless, a white shadow among the ice, guarding her treasure, not knowing that the morning would bring a change no one expected. Night fell like a blanket, heavy and cold. The wind died down, leaving a ringing silence. The mongrel didn't move. Her body was numb with cold, but her heart beat steadily, transferring warmth to the pups as they slept, huddled close. One of them whimpered in its sleep, and she immediately reacted, tucking it closer with her paw. Her eyes glistened in the darkness with vigilance. The pipes around her seemed like eternal guardians. Their icy surface reflected the stars breaking through the clouds. She sniffed the air, the scent of snow, metal, and a distant hint of smoke from homeless people's fires. But here in the alcove was her world. 6 tiny creatures. Their breathing was synchronized with hers, creating a rhythm of life in the middle of a dead winter. Morning came with the crunch of footsteps. Workers walked around the territory, their boots breaking the crust of snow. The mongrel froze, her ears perked, but the pups stirred, and she whimpered quietly, calming them. The footsteps approached, voices echoed off the pipes, and she pressed herself lower. Her white fur was a good camouflage in the snow. Her heart was pounding. Was it a threat or salvation? She didn't know, but instinct whispered, "Hold on. For their sake." The shadows of people flickered at the entrance, and the air filled with a new scent, human warmth, that could change everything. Night descended on the industrial zone like a heavy curtain soaked in frost, where every breath of the mongrel turned into a cloud of steam, melting into the darkness. Her white fur, now covered with a thin layer of hoarfrost, trembled in the gusts of wind that broke through the gaps between the pipes, but she didn't move an inch. Her body was bent in a semicircle around the 6 tiny creatures that huddled against her belly in search of shelter. The pups, blind and helpless, nudged their noses into her warm skin. Their tiny paws scraped the ground, instinctively looking for her teats, where milk flowed in a thin stream, mixing with the salty sweat of exhaustion. The wind howled harder, carrying snowflakes as sharp as needles, which settled on her back, melting from the heat of her body and then freezing into a crust again. The mongrel blinked, her eyes, reflecting the faint moonlight, scanned the entrance to the alcove. Shadows moved where the branches of bushes hit the metal, but she didn't growl, saving her strength. She just pressed herself lower. Her breath came out rhythmically, enveloping the pups in a warm cloud. One of the puppies, the weakest, with fur that had barely dried after birth, squeaked quietly. Its tiny body trembled with cold, and she immediately reacted. Her tongue slipped out, licking it from its snout to its tail, warming its blood, pushing it closer to the center, where her heart beat like a drum, transmitting the vibration of life. The cold crawled up her paws, freezing her joints, but the mongrel ignored the pain. Her ears caught every rustle, the distant rumble of machines, the creak of metal in the wind. While the pups were nursing, their whimpering subsided, replaced by a contented purring. She remembered how once, in another life, she had warmed herself by a homeless people's bonfire, but now this warmth was her own, squeezed from her exhausted body, where hunger gnawed from within and thirst scraped her throat. The moon rose higher. Its light broke through the clouds, illuminating the alcove with a silvery glow, where the mother's white fur blended with the snow, making them almost invisible. But inside, their own world reigned. The warmth of milk, the softness of her belly, the rhythm of breathing that was synchronized with the beating of 6 tiny hearts. Time stretched on, the wind died down for a moment, leaving a silence broken only by a rare whimper. One pup crawled slightly to the side. Its paws slipped on the ice, and the mongrel immediately tucked it back with her paw. Her snout lowered. Her nose buried itself in the wet fur, inhaling the smell of newness that gave her the strength to hold on. The hoarfrost on the pipes grew thicker. Their surface gleamed like a mirror, reflecting her silhouette, emaciated but unyielding, with eyes in which a spark glowed, not letting her give up. She licked another pup, feeling its body relax under her touch. And at that moment the cold receded, giving way to an inner warmth that spread through her veins, reminding her, they're alive. And that was the main thing. The night deepened, stars twinkled through the breaks in the clouds, and the mongrel didn't close her eyes. Her body served as a shield, absorbing the frost so the pups wouldn't feel its bite. The largest of the litter, with slightly darker fur, stirred. Its little nose nudged the mother's side, and she responded with a low rumble, a vibration that soothed. Like a lullaby without words. The wind returned, blowing snow into the shelter. The snowflakes melted on her nose, dripping down, but she didn't shake them off, afraid to disturb the pup's sleep. Their breathing was now even. Their bodies pressed so tightly that they seemed like one with her. Somewhere in the distance a siren howled, echoing off the pipes. The mongrel tensed. Her ears flattened, but the sound died down, leaving her alone with the night, where every moment was a battle for warmth. The pups were full, one by one, detaching from her teats, their bodies curled up in balls under her belly, and the mongrel allowed herself to lower her head. Her snout rested on her paws, her eyes half closed, but her vigilance didn't wane. The cold seeped deeper, freezing the tip of her tail, but she focused on the feeling. The warm lumps stirring in their sleep, their squeaks like music that gave her hope. The moon slipped behind a cloud, plunging the alcove into complete darkness, where only the mother's breath illuminated the path. Her body was a beacon in the cold, where love warmed more than any fire. She licked the air, catching the scent of milk and snow, and at that moment, she felt a surge of strength, whispering, "Dawn will come and they will endure." The wind subsided by midnight. The snowfall was replaced by a quiet fall of flakes that settled softly, covering the entrance to the alcove with a white blanket. The mongrel raised her head, sniffing. The air became cleaner, the frost sharper, but the pups were sleeping soundly. Their bodies radiated a tiny heat, returning to her like an echo. She licked her paw, warming her numb toes, and moved the smallest one closer. Its squeak died down under her tongue, and its eyes, if they had opened, would have seen only the mother's warmth. The pipes around her creaked, the ice cracked under the pressure of the night, but inside the shelter, peace reigned, where her breath created a steam barrier, warding off the cold. The hours stretched on, the mongrel didn't sleep. Her thoughts, if dogs think, revolved around the puppies. Their first steps, the first rays of sun on their fur. But reality bit with frost, reminding her of their fragility. One pup whimpered in its sleep, and she immediately reacted. Her snout lowered, her nose nudged it, calming it. Her warmth flowed into it like a river of life. Stars twinkled, the wind whispered threats, but she held on, her body trembling but not giving up. Her eyes glistened with determination in the darkness. Dawn was far away, but a spark glowed in her heart. They were not alone. Her love was a shield that would endure the night. By morning, the frost had tightened its grip. The pipes were covered with a new crust of hoarfrost. But the mongrel didn't move. Her body was numb, but the pups huddled closer. Their breathing synchronized with hers, creating a rhythm of survival. She licked the air, catching a hint of morning, a brightening horizon where the sun could bring relief. Footsteps were heard in the distance, but she didn't get up, focusing on the warmth she was giving. Her eyes closed for a moment, dreaming of the day when the cold would recede forever. Dawn broke with a weak ray, illuminating the alcove where the white mongrel lay, her fur sparkling with hoarfrost, but life was glowing under her belly. 6 pups, saved by her warmth from a night that could have taken everything. The footsteps approached, voices echoed, and she tensed, but a shadow of hope flickered in her eyes. Maybe it wasn't a threat, but salvation. The dawn broke through the low clouds, painting the industrial zone in a pale pink light, where rusty pipes cast long shadows, like fingers reaching for the sky. Two workers, Juan and Marco, walked on the crunchy snow. Their boots left deep tracks in the drifts, and their breath came out in clouds of steam, mixing with the smell of metal and oil. Juan, the older one with graying temples, a knotted hat, carried a flashlight, its beam sliding along the ground, picking out fragments of pipes and forgotten tools from the semi-darkness. Marco, younger with shoulders hunched against the morning cold, dragged a bag of tools. His gloves crunched in the frost as he grumbled about the coffee waiting in the break room. They walked around the territory as usual, checking for cracks in the pipes, for signs of vandals. But today the wind had died down, leaving a ringing silence broken only by their footsteps and the distant hum of the city. Juan stopped at a crossroads of pipes. His flashlight froze on a narrow alcove where the snow seemed untouched, but something stirred in the depths. A white ball, blending in with the hoarfrost. He blinked, rubbed his eyes with the sleeve of his jacket, and the beam slid closer. There, between the icy walls, a dog was curled up. Her fur sparkled in the light, and her eyes, lifted to meet him, gleamed with wariness without a growl, only a quiet whimper that echoed off the metal. Marco froze behind him. His bag thumped dully on the ground as he leaned in, squinting. "Look, Juan, those are puppies." The flashlight trembled in the older man's hand, picking out tiny bodies huddling against the mother's belly, their snouts wet with milk, their paws weakly moving in the snow. The white mongrel didn't move, her body tensed, her ears flattened, but her gaze didn't leave the men. A shadow of trust flickered in it, mixed with despair, as if she were waiting for a verdict. Juan knelt down, slowly extending his hand, not touching, just letting her sniff the air, soaked with the smell of sweat and metal. His voice came out in a hoarse whisper. "Poor thing, how did you survive here?" Marco went around the pipe from the side. His boot hit the hoarfrost, which showered down in flakes, and the pups squeaked quietly. One of them, the weakest, nudged its nose into the mother's side, seeking protection. The mongrel licked it quickly, not taking her eyes off the newcomers. Her tail trembled. Not a wag, but a barely noticeable movement, like a tentative bridge. The workers exchanged glances. Juan took off his glove, blew on his fingers, warming them, and carefully moved the flashlight closer, illuminating the litter. 6 of them, with fur still matted, their bodies trembling under the thin layer of snow that had seeped in during the night. "They're barely breathing from the cold," Marco muttered. His face softened, his eyes glistened as he probably remembered his own dog from childhood, lost in a similar winter. The wind stirred the snow around them, dusting the alcove with fresh flakes, and the mongrel pressed herself lower. Her breathing quickened. Steam billowed from her snout, enveloping the pups. Juan stood up, dusting off his knees. His voice became firmer. "We can't leave them here, Marco. The frost will finish them off by noon." The younger man nodded, taking off his jacket despite the chill, and spread it on the snow, gesturing. "Come on, gently, don't scare her." They worked together just like on a job with pipes. Juan distracted with the flashlight. Marco moved the fabric closer, and the mongrel, after a long pause, during which her eyes scanned their faces, allowed one pup to be moved. Her tongue flickered, licking the air, as if tasting their intentions. The pups squealed louder when their bodies were lifted from their mother's warmth. But Juan wrapped them in the jacket quickly. His hands, callous from work, became unexpectedly gentle, pressing the lumps to his chest. The mongrel got to her feet, swaying from exhaustion. Snow fell from her fur, and she stepped forward. Her nose nudged the bundle, sniffing, making sure. Marco held out his hand, palm open, and she licked his fingers, salty with sweat. Her tail trembled more strongly. Her eyes warmed, reflecting the first ray of sun that broke through the clouds. "She trusts us," Juan whispered. His voice trembled, and something long forgotten stirred in his chest, like the warmth of a hearth. They stepped back slightly, giving her space, and the mongrel followed, her paws sinking into the snow. But her gaze didn't leave the bundle where the pups had fallen silent, lulled by the movement. The area around them came to life, distant voices of colleagues, the hum of machines. But in this alcove, time stood still, where a random find turned a routine upside down. Juan nodded to Marco. "We'll take them to the break room and call a vet." The younger man smiled for the first time that morning. His steps became lighter, carrying the hope that this winter wouldn't take another life. The mongrel walked beside him. Her snout was held high, her eyes shining. Not with fear, but with a spark that humans could be salvation, not trouble. The sun rose higher, melting the hoarfrost on the pipes. Drops fell with a quiet tap while the trio, 2 men and a white shadow with a litter, moved through the zone, leaving tracks in the snow leading to warmth. A fire in the stove was waiting in the break room, but along the way, Juan felt the bundle stir against his chest and a tiny nose nudged the fabric, and his heart ached not from cold, but from a sudden connection that was born in the icy shelter. They entered the break room, the door creaking. It released a cloud of warmth mixed with the smell of coffee and smoke. Marco spread an old blanket by the stove. Juan knelt down, unwrapping the jacket, and the pups scattered onto the fabric, squealing, looking for their mother. The mongrel lay down next to them. Her body sagged with relief. Her tongue flickered, licking each one. Her eyes were half closed, but vigilant. Their colleagues gathered around, whispering, but Juan raised a hand. "Quiet. Let them catch their breath." At that moment, by the crackling fire, a chance find became the beginning of something more, where the frost receded, giving way to the warmth of human hands. Evening descended, but the break room was cozy. The pups had eaten, the mother was dozing, and the workers exchanging glances knew. This is not the end of the patrol, but the beginning of a rescue that will change everything. The break room hummed with warmth, permeated by the smell of coffee and damp wood. But outside its walls, the frost squeezed the industrial zone in an icy vice, where the shadows of the pipes cast long lines on the snow. Juan, with his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, knelt by the old blanket where the white mongrel was curled up around her pups. Her eyes followed his every move, but without wariness now. A spark of trust flickered in them, like a faint light in the night. The pups, 6 tiny lumps, squeaked quietly, nudging their noses into her belly. Their fur, still matted, gleamed in the dim light of the lamp. Marco, leaning against the wall, fidgeted with the edge of his hat. His gaze darted from the dog to Juan, and a warmth grew in his chest that he hadn't felt since childhood, when his own dog slept at his feet. "We have to take them, Juan," Marco said. His voice trembled not with cold, but with a determination that flared up like a spark from a match. Juan nodded. His fingers, rough from work, carefully touched the edge of the blanket where one pup, the weakest, with a dark spot on its snout, stirred, seeking warmth. The mongrel raised her head. Her nose twitched, sniffing, and Juan froze, meeting her gaze, as deep as a well full of exhaustion but not fear. "We won't abandon them," he whispered, more for her than for Marco. And she, as if understanding, licked the air. Her tail moved slightly, touching the fabric. The plan was born quickly, as always with workers used to fixing pipes under pressure of time. Juan stood up, dusting off his knees, and looked around the break room, cramped with peeling paint on the walls but warm with a stove that crackled in the corner, releasing waves of heat. "My apartment is nearby," he said. "There's enough space there. But we have to be careful not to scare her." Marco nodded, already taking off his jacket to wrap the pups. But the mongrel tensed, her ears twitched, and he froze, raising his hands. "Easy, girl, we're with you." She stared, not blinking. Her eyes scanned his face as if weighing his intentions, and after a long pause, she lowered her snout to the pups, licking the nearest one as if giving permission. Juan found an old cardboard box in the corner, where they usually put rusty bolts, and emptied its contents, ignoring the protesting creak of his colleagues who were drinking coffee at the table. He laid a clean rag inside, smelling of machine oil but soft, and carefully moved the box to the blanket. "Marco, hold her," he whispered, and the younger worker knelt next to the mongrel, holding out his palm for her to sniff. Her nose touched his fingers, warm and wet, and she didn't flinch, but only nudged her snout slightly as if agreeing. Juan started with the largest pup, carefully scooping it up under its belly. Its squeak cut through the air, but the mongrel didn't growl. She just watched. Her breathing quickened. Steam billowed in the air. One by one, the pups moved into the box. Their bodies trembled from the change in temperature. But one whispered something indistinct, calming them. His hands used to iron became soft like a father rocking a child. The mongrel got up, swaying. Her paws trembled with exhaustion, but she stepped toward the box. Her nose nudged the rag, checking if everything was in place. Marco, not wasting time, took his spare jacket, an old one with paint stains but warm, from the hanger and wrapped the box from the top, creating a semblance of a nest. "Now you girl," he said, looking at the mother, and she, after a moment's hesitation, nudged her snout into his knee, as if acknowledging an ally. The exit from the break room was like an escape. Juan carried the box, pressing it to his chest so it wouldn't shake. Marco walked beside him, holding the mongrel by a makeshift collar of an old belt, gently so as not to scare her. Snow crunched under their feet, the wind bit at their cheeks, but they moved quickly, avoiding the drifts where the shadows of the pipe still stretched like guardians. The mongrel walked beside them, her eyes never leaving the box where the pups were whimpering. And every step was a struggle. Her paws sank, but she held on, guided by instinct. Juan noticed how her fur, white as snow, trembled in the wind, and he quickened his pace, feeling his heart pounding not only from the cold. Juan's car, an old pickup with a cracked windshield, waited at the edge of the zone. Marco opened the back door, and they placed the box on the seat, which was covered with an old blanket that smelled of gasoline and dust. The mongrel jumped in after them without waiting for an invitation, and her paws slipped on the upholstery. But she immediately lay down next to the box. Her snout rested on the edge, her eyes shining, guarding. One started the engine. The heater rumbled, releasing a stream of warm air, and the pickup drove off, leaving tracks in the snow that led away from the icy labyrinth. Marco, sitting next to her, looked at the mother, whose fur sparkled in the light of the streetlights, and muttered, "You're a good girl. You made it." The road to Juan's apartment stretched through the sleeping city, where the lights of shop windows were reflected in puddles of melting snow. The mongrel didn't move, her breathing synchronized with the pup's whimpering, and Juan, glancing in the mirror, saw her eyes shining. Not with fear, but with a hope that for the first time in a week wasn't empty. He parked the pickup at an old house, where the light in the stairwell flickered and the stairs smelled of dampness. He and Marco unloaded the box. The mongrel jumped down after them. Her paws trembled, but she stayed close, not falling behind as they went up the creaking stairs. The apartment door opened with a crunch, releasing the smell of fried potatoes and old books. Juan brought in the box, placing it by the radiator, where warmth was already beginning to spread, and Marco led the mongrel over. Her nose immediately nudged the pups, checking if they were all there. She lay down next to them. Her body relaxed, but her eyes remained open, watching their every move. Juan knelt down, his hand touching her head, and she didn't flinch. She just licked his fingers, leaving a trace of warmth. "Now you're home," he whispered. And at that moment, under the hum of the radiator, the rescue operation was completed, but a new chapter began for all of them. Juan's apartment breathed with warmth, permeated with the smell of old wooden floors and yesterday's dinner, where the radiator by the window hummed like a living creature, warding off the cold that clung to the walls. The white mongrel lay on an old blanket spread by the radiator. Her fur, still damp from the snow, gleamed in the dim light of the lamp, and 6 pups huddled against her belly. Their tiny bodies trembled, but not from the frost now, but from the new warmth that enveloped them like a life raft. Juan, with his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, was on his knees. His hands, calloused from work, moved carefully, spreading clean rags he had found in the closet around them. Marco, squatting, held a bowl of water. His eyes, usually squinted with fatigue, now glistened, reflecting the light in something else. A hope that had flared up like a spark on a cold night. The mongrel raised her head. Her nose twitched, catching the scent of water and hands that smelled of metal and sweat. She licked the air, checking, and Juan moved the bowl closer. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Drink, girl, you need it." She looked at him, her eyes as deep as moonlit lakes, and after a pause she nudged her snout into the bowl. Her tongue greedily scooped up water. Drops ran down her chin, mixing with the melted snow. The pups squeaked. One of them, with a dark spot on its snout, crawled slightly to the side, and she immediately tucked it back with her paw, not stopping drinking. Her gaze darted to Juan, as if thanking him without words. Marco stood up, looking around the kitchen, where dirty dishes were piled on the table and the remains of chicken soup that Juan's wife had made on the weekend were in the refrigerator. "We have to feed them," he said, opening the door, and the cold air hit his face, but he was already rummaging around, looking for something suitable. Juan nodded. His fingers touched the mongrel's fur, checking if she was hurt, and she didn't flinch. She just licked his hand, leaving a warm trace. "The soup will do," he muttered. "But we have to warm it up, can't give them cold food." He stood up, the chair scraping, and went to the stove, where the pot clinked against the burner, releasing the aroma of broth that filled the room, mixing with the smell of wet fur. The pups stirred, their squeaks grew louder, and the mongrel tensed, her ears twitching, but Juan knelt beside her, whispering, "Quiet, it's okay." He took one of the rags, moistened it in warm water from the kettle, and carefully wiped the weakest pup, whose fur was thinner, almost transparent. The pup squeaked, but the warm cloth calmed it, and it nudged its nose into his palm, seeking milk. The mongrel watched, her breathing quickened, but she didn't growl, she just moved closer. Her snout touched the box where the others lay, checking if everything was in place. Marco returned with a bowl of soup, already warm but not hot, and placed it next to her. His fingers trembled not from cold, but from the excitement that for the first time in years, he was doing something outside the scope of his work. "Let's try," Juan said, scooping up a little broth with a spoon and holding it out to the mongrel's snout. She sniffed. Her nose trembled, and after a long look where her eyes sought a trick, she licked the liquid. The taste of salt and meat made her tail move, and she eagerly drank more. Her tongue flickered, licking the bowl clean. The pups, sensing the movement, squeaked louder, and Juan smiled. His face, usually sullen, softened. "Look, Marco, she's coming back to life." The younger worker nodded. His gaze slid to the pups, and he took a rag soaked in warm water, starting to wipe them carefully so as not to scare the mother. The warmth of the radiator spread through the room, warding off the cold that still clung to the mongrel's fur. She was full, her snout was raised, her eyes shone brighter, and she licked the nearest pup. Her tongue worked rhythmically, returning warmth to the little ones. One noticed how the smallest one, with barely noticeable fur, was trembling less. Its squeak became more confident, and he moved it closer to the teat, feeling his heart ache, not with fatigue, but with a connection that grew with every moment. Marco, wiping his hands on his jeans, muttered, "We need to call a vet, get them checked out." Juan nodded, but his gaze remained on the mongrel, whose fur was now dry and sparkled under the lamp like snow under the sun. The kitchen came to life, the stove hissed, the radiator hummed, the pups whimpered, and the mongrel, having eaten, lay down more tightly. Her body hugged the litter, creating a nest of warmth and fur. One found an old sweater in the closet, smelling of laundry detergent, and placed it under them so the blanket wouldn't absorb moisture. The mongrel nudged her nose into the fabric, checking, and her tail moved. Not a full wag, but a sign of trust that for the first time in weeks wasn't empty. Marco, standing by the window, watched the snow falling outside the glass and whispered, "We pulled them out, Juan. We pulled them out." Night crept up on the city, but the apartment was cozy, where the smell of soup mixed with the warmth of the radiator. One called the vet. His voice trembled with fatigue, but it was firm. "Urgent. We have puppies and a mother who are barely alive." The mongrel raised her head. Her eyes followed him, and when he returned, she licked his hand as if understanding. The pups were sleeping, their breathing synchronized with hers. And Marco, sitting on a chair, looked at them, feeling something change inside him. As if this night didn't just save the dogs but them too. The vet arrived an hour later. His little bag clinked on the threshold, and he knelt by the blanket. His hands moved confidently, checking the pups, But the mongrel didn't growl, she just watched. Her snout lay next to them, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "They're weak, but you were on time," he said. And Juan exhaled. His shoulders sagged and Marco smiled, for the first time that day, not hiding his relief. First aid was given, but it was just the beginning for a family that was born in the cold, and for the people whose hearts opened to warmth. The pups stirred. One of them, with a dark spot on its snout, squeaked louder, and the mongrel immediately lowered her head. Her tongue ran over its fur, calming it, returning warmth. Juan noticed how her eyes, half closed with fatigue, still watched his every move. Not out of fear, but out of an instinct that didn't wane even in the warmth. He moved the bowl with the remaining soup, now mixed with pieces of bread soaked in water, and she sniffed. Her nose trembled, catching the scent. She licked it, then greedily swallowed a piece. Her gaze darted to Juan, and a spark flickered in it. Not just hunger but gratitude that didn't require words. Marco, sitting nearby, looked at the pups. Their bodies, now a little rounder from the milk, stirred in their sleep, and he muttered, "They've gotten stronger, Juan. She saved them and we saved her." The mongrel, as if hearing, raised her snout, her eyes met his, and she nudged her nose into his knee, leaving a wet trail on his jeans. Marco froze. His hand froze in the air, and then slowly descended, touching her head gently as if afraid to break the moment. She didn't pull away, she closed her eyes. Her breathing became more even, as if the warmth of his hand confirmed, "It's safe here." The kitchen came to life, the radiator hummed, the pups whimpered, and the mongrel, having eaten, lay down more tightly. Her body hugged the litter, creating a nest of fur and warmth. One stood up. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, and he opened the closet, pulling out an old blanket that smelled of laundry detergent and thyme. He wrapped the box where the pups were sleeping, leaving a gap for air, and the mongrel watched him. Her tail moved again, her eyes shining, reflecting the light of the lamp. "You're a good girl," he said. His voice was hoarse but warm like the fire in the stove. She licked the air. Her snout nudged the edge of the blanket, checking, and she lay back down. Her body relaxed, but her ears remained on alert. Outside the window, the night was thickening. Snow was falling in soft flakes, covering the city with a white blanket. But the apartment was cozy, where the smell of bread and soup mixed with the warmth of the radiator. Juan sat down on a chair, his hands resting on his knees, and he looked at the mongrel, whose fur now sparkled not with hoarfrost, but with warmth. She raised her head. Her eyes met his, and at that moment something changed. Not just a rescue, but a connection that grew with every look. She licked the nearest pup. Her tongue worked rhythmically, but her gaze returned to Juan, and she whined softly. Not from pain but like a song of wordless gratitude. Marco stood by the window, looking out at the street where lampposts cast yellow circles on the snow. "Do you think she understands?" he asked, not turning around, his voice trembling with emotions he wasn't used to showing. Juan shrugged, but his eyes didn't leave the mongrel. "She knows more than we think." As if in response, the mongrel nudged her snout into his hand, which lay nearby, and licked his fingers, leaving a warmth that spread through his veins like fire. The pups fell silent, their breathing synchronized with hers, and the room was filled with a stillness broken only by the hum of the radiator and a rare whimper. The vet had left, leaving instructions. Milk for the pups, rest for the mother. But the mongrel already knew what to do. She lay down more tightly, her body a shield, and her eyes, now half closed, gleamed with a gratitude that needed no explanation. Juan moved the water bowl closer, and she drank greedily. Her tail moved, touching the blanket, as a sign that she accepted their help. Marco smiled, his hand resting on Juan's shoulder. "We did it, old man." But in his voice there was not pride but something deeper. The feeling that they had not just saved lives, but had become part of something bigger. They found an old, dusty but intact mattress from a baby's crib and moved it to the corner of the kitchen by the radiator, where the warmth was thicker, like an invisible cocoon. Juan spread a clean sheet over it, smelling of lavender from being laundered, and added another blanket folded in half so the pups wouldn't slide. The mongrel watched. Her ears twitched, catching the creak of the mattress, but she didn't tense up. She just licked the nearest pup, whose dark spot on its fur shone like coal. "Come on, girl, move over," Juan whispered, moving the box of pups closer to the new spot. She got up, swaying with exhaustion. Her paws trembled, but she stepped forward. Her nose nudged the mattress, checking, and after a pause, she jumped in carefully, so as not to disturb the litter. Marco gently transferred the pups one by one. His fingers, rough from work, became as gentle as an artist drawing fine lines. The pups squeaked, feeling the change in surface, but the mongrel immediately lay down next to them. Her body embraced them. Morning in Juan's apartment broke through the curtains, thin as a spiderweb, letting in light that fell in golden spots on the worn wooden floor. The smell of hastily brewed coffee mixed with the dampness of the old walls. But the warmth of the radiator, rumbling by the window, created an island of comfort in the room that had been chaotic just yesterday. The white mongrel lay on the old blanket. Her fur, now clean of snow, shone softly like a moonbeam. And the 6 pups, huddled against her side, stirred in their sleep. Their tiny paws twitched, as if they were dreaming of running through the grass. Juan stood at the table with a mug in his hand. His eyes, usually squinted with fatigue, now sparkled, catching the pups' movements. Marco, sprawled in a chair, chewed a sandwich. His boots, still dirty from yesterday's snow, had left tracks at the door, but he didn't notice. His gaze was fixed on the dog, whose snout, slightly raised, watched them with quiet vigilance. The mongrel twitched an ear, catching the creak of the chair, and her nose, wet and black, twitched, inhaling the air. The smell of bread, human sweat, but most importantly, a safety that hung in the room like invisible smoke. She licked the nearest pup, the smallest one with fur as fine as down. Her eyes, as deep as a winter night, slid toward Juan. He caught her gaze. His hand with the mug froze, and something warm stirred in his chest, like embers glowing after a long fire. "It's too cramped for her here, Marco," he said, putting the mug on the table. His voice was low, but in it, a resolve rang out like a hammer on iron. Marco swallowed a bite, nodded, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You're right. They need a better corner than this blanket." They moved through the apartment. Their steps echoed loudly as they looked for something to set up a new place. Juan dragged an old wooden fruit crate out of the storage room, slotted but sturdy, and threw a couple of sweaters inside, smelling of laundry detergent and time. Marco, rummaging through the closet, found a worn-out blanket, once bright blue, now faded but soft. And together they built a nest in the corner of the kitchen, where the radiator gave off heat like a small hearth. The mongrel watched. Her ears twitched, catching every sound. The thud of wood, the rustle of fabric, but she didn't growl. She just nudged her snout into a pup whose dark spot on its face stood out like coal on snow. "Time to move, girl," one said, kneeling down. His hands, callous from wrenches, slowly moved the crate closer. The mongrel got up, her paws trembling from yesterday's exhaustion, but she stepped toward the new spot. Her nose sniffed the wood, the sweaters. And after a long look where her eyes sought a trick, she jumped in carefully, like a cat afraid of disturbing the silence. Marco gently transferred the pups one by one. His fingers, usually gripping tools, now held them like fragile treasures, and he passed them to Juan, who arranged them in the crate next to their mother. The pups squeaked, feeling the change in warmth, but the mongrel immediately lay down. Her body hugged them like a white wave, and they fell silent, burying their noses in her fur. The kitchen came to life, the radiator hummed, the smell of coffee mixed with the warmth, and the pups, full of milk, slept. Their breathing was faint but even like a pulse. Juan moved the water bowl closer, and the mongrel drank. Her tongue flickered, leaving drops on the sweater, and her half-closed eyes shone, reflecting the light. Marco, standing by the window, watched the snow outside the glass fall lazily and muttered, "They're home now, Juan. For real." Juan nodded. His hand rested on the edge of the crate, his fingers touching the mongrel's fur, and she didn't flinch. She nudged her snout into his palm, leaving a wet trail that was warmer than any word. The sun rose higher. Its rays broke through the curtains, illuminating the crate where the mongrel was curled up, her fur sparkling like snow in the midday sun. The pups stirred. One of them, the largest, nudged its nose into her side and she licked it. Her tongue worked rhythmically, like a song that needed no words. Juan stood up, his steps echoing with the creak of the floorboards, and he opened the refrigerator, taking out the leftover chicken to mash into a paste for the mother. "She needs strength," he said. And Marco, already fumbling in his pockets, took out his phone to find the number of a shelter or a vet, but his fingers froze. "What if we just keep them here?" "Juan, you have enough space." The mongrel raised her head, as if she had heard, and her eyes met Juan's. There was no fear in them, only a quiet plea not to take away this corner where warmth had become their world. Juan knelt beside her, his hand resting on her head, and she closed her eyes. Her breathing became deeper, as if for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to relax. The pups slept, their bodies rising in unison with hers, and the room was filled with a stillness broken only by the hum of the radiator and a rare rustle. Marco smiled, his hand fidgeting with the edge of his hat. "We're not giving them up, are we?" One didn't answer. But his gaze, fixed on the crate, was the answer. This corner has become their home and he won't destroy it. The day dragged on, the sun slid across the sky, and in the apartment, a peace reigned where the smell of chicken and coffee mixed with a warmth that came not only from the radiator, but also from the bond that had connected the people and the dogs. The mongrel licked a pup, then Juan's hand, her tail moved, touching the sweater. And at that moment the new home became not just a corner, but the beginning of a life where the cold remained outside the door. The pups had changed. Their fur, once matted, now bristled like the down on a dandelion, and their eyes, which had just begun to open, gleamed with curiosity, reflecting the light of the lamp. The largest one, with a dark spot on its snout, was the first to dare to crawl away from its mother. Its paws shuffled across the sweater as it nudged its nose into the edge of the crate, as if exploring the boundaries of a new world. The mongrel watched. Her snout was slightly raised and her nose twitched, catching the smells, food, people. But most importantly, her pups, whose squeaky voices filled the room. She licked the nearest one, the weakest, whose fur was thinner, almost transparent. And it nudged into her side, seeking warmth, but already with a hint of audacity, as if preparing for its first step. Juan put down his mug, and his steps echoed with the creak of the floorboards, and he knelt by the crate. His hand, rough from work, slowly reached out to the pup with the spot, which immediately nudged its nose into his palm, licking his salty fingers. "Look how brave he is," he said. His voice was low, but joy rang in it, like a bell in the silence. The mongrel didn't tense up. Her eyes, deep and calm, watched Juan, and her tail moved, touching the sweater, as if acknowledging him as part of her world. Marco put down his phone and moved closer. His boots squeaked, and he laughed when another pup, with white fur like its mother's, tried to climb onto his knee. Its paws slipped, but its persistence didn't wane. "They're growing, Juan," Marco said. His hand carefully scooped up the pup, supporting it under its belly so it wouldn't fall. The mongrel raised her snout, and her nose sniffed the air, and she nudged Marco's hand, leaving a wet trail, a sign of trust. The pups, feeling the movement, became restless. Their squeaks grew louder, and one with a gray spot on its back bit its brother's ear, eliciting an indignant squeal. Juan laughed. His laughter echoed loudly off the walls, and he scooped up the troublemaker, holding it in his palm, where it immediately fell silent, burying its nose in his warm skin. "This one will be a fighter," he said, and the mongrel, as if agreeing, licked the air. Her eyes shone, reflecting the light. The kitchen came to life. The radiator hummed, the smell of broth wafted through the air, and the pups, now bolder, began to explore the crate, their paws pattering on the sweater, leaving tiny tracks. Juan took a bowl of mashed chicken mixed with rice from the refrigerator and placed it in front of the mongrel. Her nose immediately buried itself in the food, her tongue worked greedily, and her tail moved faster like a metronome. She ate, but her gaze never left the pups, who were already trying to get out of the crate, and their clumsy jumps made the men smile. Marco, scooping up the fastest one, placed it on the floor, where it immediately ran to a boot, sniffing the laces. And the mongrel didn't object. She just watched. Her ears twitched, catching every sound. The day dragged on, the sun slid across the sky, and in the apartment, a new rhythm reigned. The pups were learning about the world. Their paws slipped, but every step was a victory. Juan, noticing how the weakest pup was lagging behind, carefully moved it to its mother, and she licked it, nudging it toward her teat, where it latched on greedily. Its tiny body trembled with the effort. "Hold on, little one," Juan whispered. His fingers touched the mongrel's fur, and she nudged her snout into his hand, leaving a warmth that spread through his veins like a sunbeam. Marco, sitting on the floor, played with another pup, rolling a ball of crumpled foil in front of it, and his laughter, as rare as spring in this winter, filled the room. The mongrel, having eaten her fill, lay down more tightly. Her body hugged the pups, but now she allowed them to crawl a little farther away. Her eyes watched, but without anxiety now. Here in this corner the world was safe. One stood up. His steps echoed, and he brought an old box where his long-grown son's toys lay. A rubber ball, worn but intact, and a rope that smelled of dust. He threw them into the crate, and the pups immediately perked up. One with a gray spot bit the rope, dragging it with comical seriousness. The mongrel licked the air, her tail moved, and she looked at Juan as if saying, "This is their home." Evening descended, the light from the lamp became warmer, and the pups, tired from playing, curled up with their mother. Their breathing was synchronized with hers like a melody. Marco, sipping his coffee, said, "They're not the same as they were in the pipes, Juan. Look how they're coming back to life." Juan nodded, his hand resting on the crate, his fingers touching the mongrel's fur, and she closed her eyes. Her snout nudged his palm, leaving a trace of trust. In this corner, among the creak of floorboards and the hum of the radiator, the pups were growing up, and their new home became not just a shelter, but a place where life blossomed like a flower through the snow. In Juan's apartment, morning broke with a soft light, penetrating the thin curtains where dust motes swirled in the rays like tiny sparks. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the warm aroma of oatmeal boiling on the stove, and the light musk of fur coming from the corner of the kitchen, where a wooden crate lined with old sweaters had become the center of a new world. The white mongrel lay there. Her fur, fluffy and clean, caught the sun's reflections, and the 6 pups, now confidently pattering on their paws, were scurrying around. Their eyes, open and shiny like black beads, sparkled with curiosity. Juan, sitting at the table with his mug, watched them. His face, usually grim from the workday, softened, and a warmth grew in his chest, like from a smoldering hearth. Marco, sprawled in a chair, chewed on toast. His boots, cleaned of snow, stood by the door, but his gaze, now lively, was fixed on the pups, whose clumsy jumps brought a smile, a rarity in this city. The pups had grown. Their fur, once thin, now bristled like down, and their paws, still shaky, confidently patted on the sweater, exploring the boundaries of the crate. The bravest one, with a dark spot on its snout, was the first to venture out. Its nose nudged the floor, catching the smells: oatmeal, dust, people. The mongrel watched. Her snout was slightly raised. Her ears twitched, catching the creak of the floorboards, but she didn't jump up. She just licked the air. Her eyes, deep and calm, slid toward Juan, as if acknowledging him as part of her world. He caught that look, his hand with the mug froze, and he smiled. His voice, low and warm, cut through the silence. "Look at them running around, Marco. They're not the same little balls we found." Marco put down his toast. His fingers, still smelling of machine oil, reached out to the pup that nudged his knee, trying to bite a shoelace. "This one will be the leader," he said, scooping up the little one. His palm, rough from work, became soft like a father rocking a child. The mongrel didn't tense up. She nudged her nose into Marco's hand, leaving a wet trail. Her tail moved, touching the sweater, a sign of the trust that had grown over the weeks. The pups became restless. One with a gray spot on its back jumped on its brother, causing an indignant squeak. And Juan laughed. His laughter echoed loudly off the walls, filling the kitchen with a life that had been absent for a long time. Juan stood up. His steps echoed with a creak, and he approached the crate where the mongrel was lying. Her snout now rested on the edge. Her eyes watched the pups running around on the floor. He knelt down, his hand touching her head, and she closed her eyes, licking his fingers, leaving a warmth that spread through his veins like a sunbeam. "You raised them, girl," he whispered, and she nudged her snout into his palm as if agreeing. Marco, scooping up another pup, rolled a ball of foil in front of it, and the one with white fur like its mother's jumped after it. Its paws slipped, but its persistence didn't wane. "We can't give them away, Juan," Marco said. His voice trembled not with doubt, but with a resolve that had strengthened like the roots of a tree. Juan nodded, his gaze sliding from the pups to the mongrel, and he understood. They were no longer guests but family. The kitchen hummed, the radiator crackled, the smell of oatmeal wafted through the air, and the pups, now brave, scurried across the floor. Their squeaks mixed with barking, still faint but ringing. Juan took an old box from the closet where his son's toys lay, a worn rubber ball and a rope that smelled of dust. He threw them on the floor, and the pups immediately pounced, dragging the rope with comical seriousness. While the mongrel watched, her tail moved like a metronome, and her eyes shone, reflecting the light. Marco laughed, scooping up the fastest one, and it licked his chin, leaving a trail that made him freeze, feeling his heart ache with tenderness. The day dragged on. The sun slid across the sky, and in the apartment, a new rhythm reigned. The pups learned to run, and their paws patted the floor, leaving trails of joy. Juan placed a bowl of mashed chicken in front of the mongrel, and she ate greedily. Her tongue flickered, and her gaze never left the pups, who now dared to go farther. "They're yours, but they're ours too," Juan said. His hand rested on her head, and she nudged her snout into his palm. Her breathing became deeper, as if for the first time she allowed herself to believe. This was forever. Marco stood by the window, watching the snow that was melting under the sun, and he muttered, "We're not giving them away, Juan, to anyone." Evening descended, the light from the lamp became warmer, and the pups, tired from playing, curled up with their mother, and their breathing was synchronized with hers like a melody. The mongrel lay down more tightly. Her body hugged the litter, but now she looked at Juan and Marco with a warmth that needed no words. Juan knelt beside her, his fingers touched her fur, and she licked his hand, leaving a trail of trust that bound them all together. Marco, sipping his coffee, smiled. "They're home now, Juan. A family." In this corner, among the creak of floorboards and the hum of the radiator, the mongrel and the pups became not just saved, but part of a life where love became the foundation of their new home.